The attempt on her life happened 10 years ago, and many had paid the price along with Lialy. There was a Grodar who lost his tail, a Mavi who lost her wings, and a human who had lost his arms, all because they happened to be sharing a ship with Lialy. The Grodar and the Mavi were understandably upset in the aftermath. Lialy, who had also lost her legs, had lowered her head and apologized in the courtroom of the Galactic Council. Her family agreed to pay the small fortune they demanded. The victims claimed they shouldn't suffer because the daughter of the biggest starship manufacturer decided to take a vacation on a resort moon in Tamius. She had never blamed them for the harsh words they had uttered years ago, understanding their anger. What she never understood, however, was the human, who not only never sued her or her family, but kept in contact all those years, sharing laughter with her through monthly letters which she had learned to expect and enjoy throughout the years. What she didn't expect, however, was that he was about to show up at her door, offering her new robotic legs. Lialy was a typical Yazur woman, with long hair that flowed like lavender, soft blue skin filled with white dots, and silver eyes that had never lost their gentle gaze. If not for the wheelchair, she would have likely been married by now, much happier perhaps, given that her first taste of independence on that vacation had made her less autonomous forever. She sat in her wheelchair by the large window of her living room, watching your near-prime sun cast shadows through the crystal wind chimes her mother had given her. The house AI's neutral voice interrupted her quiet afternoon. "Lialy, there is a visitor at the front entrance requesting access." She reached for a datapad from the side table, swiping to the security feed. The image showed a human male she didn't immediately recognize, wearing a ridiculously oversized backpack that seemed to dwarf his frame. He was gesticulating wildly at the door's interface panel. "I'm telling you, I'm Lialy's friend," his translated voice came through the speaker, slightly distorted but clearly frustrated. "Just tell her Vince is here. Vince Rivera. We've been writing letters for 10 years. Lialy's silver eyes widened as recognition dawned. The face was older, and the hair was longer, but those were definitely the same kind eyes from the faded photo he'd sent her years ago. "Grant access to the visitor," Lialy said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Warning, visitor identity unverified through standard galactic protocols. Security risk assessment indicates override the warning. Let him in. Acknowledged. Front entrance unlocked." Lialy maneuvered her wheelchair toward the foyer, her heart racing in a way it hadn't for years. The sequence of mechanical noises of the door's internal gears echoed through the house, followed by heavy footsteps and the unmistakable sound of something large being dragged across her polished floors. When Vince appeared around the corner, they both froze. He was taller than she'd imagined, with sun-withered skin and gentle brown eyes that crinkled at the corners. His hair fell in dark waves past his shoulders, and she could see the subtle gleam of metal where his left sleeve ended. But what dominated the scene was the absolutely massive backpack strapped to his shoulders, making him look like a pack animal preparing for a months-long expedition. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, taking in 10 years of changes that letters couldn't convey. Finally, Lialy's voice broke the silence. Where would you like to put that thing?" Vince glanced down at his burden, as if he'd forgotten it existed. "Oh, this? Anywhere is fine. It's heavier than it looks." "It looks extremely heavy." "Well, then it's heavier than that." He shrugged it off with a grunt, and it hit the floor with a metallic thud that made Lialy's wind chime sing in harmony. "Sorry, I may have overpacked." "May have?" Lialy couldn't help but smile. What exactly did you bring? Your entire workshop? Actually, Vince rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. That's not entirely inaccurate. I brought tools, spare parts, medical supplies, cultural guides, 3 different translation devices, emergency rations for a month, camping equipment in case you didn't want me staying here, gifts for your family, more gifts in case the first gifts were culturally inappropriate, and he trailed off, realizing how ridiculous he sounded. 1 month of rations? I wasn't sure how long this would take. How long what would take? The question lingered in the air, and suddenly the absurdity of their conversation about luggage felt like a deflection from something much more significant. Vince's expression grew serious, and he seemed to choose his words carefully. Lialy, I need to tell you why I'm here, but first, I want to make sure you understand that I have the utmost respect for your culture and your people's beliefs. I've spent years studying Yazur philosophy and customs, and I would never want to suggest your traditions are wrong or that I know better than centuries of things. Lialy held up a hand, her silver eyes amused but growing impatient. You've traveled across countless star systems with a backpack the size of a small vehicle. Just tell me what you want to say. He took a deep breath. I've been lying to you. Not about being your friend or about caring what happened to you, but about my work. I told you I was a ship engineer, and that's partially true. I am an engineer, but my specialty isn't ships. It's biomedical enhancement, cybernetic integration. Lialy's expression grew wary. Those were dangerous words in Yazur society. I spent the last decade studying your species, he continued, his words coming faster now. Not just your biology, but your culture, your fears about technology, your history with artificial enhancement. I never understood why your people were so against using technology to improve the lives of those in need, and I... He gestured toward her wheelchair. I couldn't stop thinking about you, stuck in that chair when there might be another way. The room seemed to shrink around them. Lialy felt her breathing become shallow. I've been working on something. For you, specifically. I designed legs, Lialy. Mechanical legs that could give you back everything you lost. And I came here to convince you and your family that maybe your people's fears about integration aren't as founded as they believe. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Lialy stared at him, her mind reeling. Not only had her human friend traveled across the galaxy to see her, but he'd spent years creating forbidden technology that didn't exist in her world, just to offer her something her own people would consider an abomination. The audacity of it was staggering. You're insane, she whispered. Probably. Do you have any idea what you're asking? What this would mean for me? For my family? Her voice rose, 10 years of careful acceptance threatening to crack. I'd be an outcast, a pariah. My people would look at me like I was... contaminated. I know. I've studied the social implications extensively, but Lialy, no! She shook her head, her lavender hair flowing everywhere. I can't. I won't. And I'm sorry, so sorry about what happened to your arm because of me. But I can't accept this gift. I can't. Vince was quiet for a moment. Then, without warning, he rolled up his left sleeve completely, revealing the intricate mechanical limb beneath. It was beautiful in its complexity, gleaming metal and synthetic skin that moved as if it was real. Watch this, he said, and proceeded to grip a metal stylus from her side table. The mechanical fingers adjusted pressure with perfect precision, then increased until the metal began to bend. I can lift 3 times what I could before. The sensory feedback, is so complete I can feel the texture of your tablecloth. The temperature of the air, even minute vibrations. He picked up one of her letters from the table, handling the delicate paper with impressive gentleness. And the best part? I can turn off pain receptors if I need to, but keep all the good sensations. Despite herself, Lialy found herself leaning forward, fascinated. Want to see something really stupid? Vince grinned and began juggling 3 data crystals from her shelf with his mechanical hand, their movements amazingly fluid. When one started to slip, the fingers moved faster than biology would allow, catching it quicker than she could see. Lialy laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in months. You're showing off. Absolutely I am. The crystals landed perfectly in his palm. 10 years of letters about dignity and acceptance, and I'm juggling your stuff like a circus performer. For the first time, she found herself wondering if maybe, her people's ancient fears were exactly that. Ancient fears, born from a time when the technology was cruder, more dangerous. Watching Vince move with such natural grace, seeing the joy in his face as he demonstrated his enhanced capabilities, she felt something shift in her worldview. Hypothetically, she said slowly, if someone were interested in trying these legs you've designed, who would perform the procedure? Vince's juggling stopped. I would. You? I'm not just an engineer, Lialy. I'm a certified biomedical enhancement specialist. I've performed the procedure on myself multiple times, testing different configurations. I've studied your physiology extensively. Probably know more about your nervous system than most of your own doctors. The procedure isn't even surgical, not really. It's external mounting points and neural interface electrodes. The only risk would be social, not medical. Lialy was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at your near-prime sun. 10 years in this chair, 10 years of watching life pass by, of turning down invitations, of being defined by what she'd lost rather than who she was. She thought about the Grodar and the Marvi, who had also lost parts of themselves but had found ways to adapt, to continue living fully. She thought about Vince, who had taken his loss and turned it into something better. She thought about the resort moon where everything had changed, and how desperately she wanted to dance under those strange stars. If I said yes, she said finally, when would we do this? Whenever you're ready. I have everything we need in that ridiculous backpack. She turned to face him fully, her silver eyes meeting his brown ones, and for the first time in years, she felt something like hope blooming in her chest. So, should I undress, or can you do it with my clothes on? Vince's face turned a shade of red she didn't know humans could achieve. He stammered, his mechanical hand actually shaking with what she assumed was nervous feedback. Clothes are fine for the first test today. Mostly fine, there might be some adjustment needed, but... Lialy found herself smiling at his flustered reaction, a warm feeling spreading through her that she couldn't quite name, but definitely wanted to explore further. 10 days had passed since Vince had first attached the mechanical legs to her body, and now Lialy stood before her full-length mirror, marveling at her reflection. She was beautiful. There was no denying the truth any longer. Her lavender hair cascaded down her shoulders in waves of movement, each strand long and carefully cared for. The soft blue color of her skin held a new radiance, the constellation of white dots across her arms, shoulders, and face appearing more vibrant than they had in years. Her silver eyes, once dulled by resignation, now sparkled with something between hope and mischief. The mechanical legs were works of art in themselves, far more elegant than anything her people's prejudices had led her to imagine. Sleek silver and copper components flowed from the attachment points at her mid-thighs like liquid metal given form. Their framework didn't just extend downward, it curved gracefully along her back in supportive arcs that followed the natural lines of her spine, creating an almost decorative pattern that looked as much like jewelry as machinery. When she moved, the legs responded, each component working in perfect harmony to create movement that was becoming more natural with each passing hour. She took a tentative step forward, then another, her arms extending slightly for balance. There was still a moment of uncertainty with each movement. Her brain was still learning to process the new feedback from the mechanical limbs, still adapting to the sensation of pressure and movement that came through electronic impulses rather than biological nerves. But each adjustment Vince made seemed to bring her closer to perfect equilibrium. Today would be special. She'd chosen to wear what could be generously called revealing clothing. A fitted top of shimmering red fabric that ended just below her ribcage, showing off the elegant curve of her waist and the graceful line where her organic body met the mechanical framework. On her lower half, she wore what amounted to little more than decorative underwear, delicate strips of silver fabric that provided minimal coverage while allowing maximum visibility of the leg mechanisms. In any other setting, among any other people, the outfit would be scandalous, but in the privacy of her own home, with the biggest transgression being the technology itself, who cared about modesty? Besides, she told herself as she practiced another careful turn, Vince needed to see exactly how his mechanical creation was operating, needed to observe the movement of every joint, and if his adorably flustered reactions to her previous wardrobe choices were any indication, today's balanced training session would provide her with considerable entertainment. She was still admiring her reflection when she heard Vince's familiar footsteps approaching the living room. She positioned herself casually by the window, arranging herself as if she'd been standing there naturally for hours. "Good morning, Lialy. Ready for today's Bray." Vince's words died in his throat as he rounded the corner and took in her appearance. His eyes widened, traveling from her face down to the expanse of blue skin and silver mechanics, his mechanical hand tensing at his side. But to her surprise, he recovered much more quickly than he had in previous days, clearing his throat and meeting her eyes with only the faintest flush creeping up his neck. "I see we're going with the minimal interference for optimal monitoring approach today." "I'm disappointed," Lialy said, taking a careful step toward him, her enhanced legs carrying her weight with only the slightest mechanical noise. "I was counting on at least 5 minutes of stammering and perhaps some creative excuse-making about needing to check your equipment outside." "Sorry to disappoint. I'm a professional after all." But she caught the way his eyes lingered on the curves of her waist, the elegant line of her shoulders, before he forced himself to focus on the mechanical interfaces. "Besides, I have something special planned for today's session that requires my full attention." She reached into his ever-present toolkit and produced a small, round device she didn't recognize, polished metal with intricate engravings around its circumference. "What's that?" "Audio projector. Today's balance training is going to be a waltz." Lialy blinked, the unfamiliar word rolling strangely in her mind even through the translation matrix. "A what?" "A waltz. It's an ancient human dance. Very old, from Earth itself. Slow, elegant, perfect for balance training because it requires constant weight shifting and coordination between partners." He activated the device with a gentle touch, and suddenly soft, melodic music filled the room. The sound was unlike anything she'd ever heard, stringed instruments weaving together in patterns that seemed to rise and fall like gentle waves, accompanied by what sounded like wind instruments creating harmonies that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. The rhythm will help. Instead of thinking about each step as a separate mechanical action, the music will teach your brain to think in flows and curves. "You want me to dance?" The concept seemed absurd, almost cruel. "Vince, I can barely walk across the room without falling over. And you want me to perform some ancient human ritual? Which is exactly why we need to try a different approach. And if it doesn't work, I'm here to hold you." He stepped closer, his brown eyes serious but gentle. "Lialy, you were meant to move. I've seen it in every letter you wrote about that resort moon. About watching others dance while you sat and longed to join them. This is your chance." Despite her skepticism, Something about the music stirred a memory so vivid it made her breath catch. The resort moon of Tamias, the outdoor pavilions where beings from a dozen species had moved together under alien stars. The ache she'd felt watching from her wheelchair as couples spun and swayed to music that seemed to make the very air vibrant with joy. "Fine," she said reluctantly, her silver eyes meeting his. "But when I fall on my face and damage your precious engineering project, you're explaining to my parents why their daughter has a broken nose and a bruised pride." Vince stepped closer, setting down his toolkit and extending his hands toward her. One warm flesh and bone, one cool metal and synthetic skin. "Trust me." She placed her hands in his, immediately struck by the contrast. His human hand was warm, slightly calloused from years of detailed work. The mechanical limb was different, but no less remarkable. The sensory feedback was so sophisticated that she could feel his artificial pulse, the subtle variations in pressure as the motors adjusted to match her grip, even the faint warmth generated by the internal systems. "The basic step is simple," he said, beginning to move slowly, his feet marking out a pattern on her polished floor. "Step. Together. Step. Like this. Follow my lead. Don't think about the mechanics. Feel the rhythm. Let it guide you." At first, it was an unmitigated disaster. Lialy's legs moved like she wanted, but absolutely no grace. Her upper body rigid as she tried to coordinate the movement of a dozen different systems at once. "I can't do this," she gasped, her hands gripping his tighter as she fought to maintain balance. "Stop thinking," Vince said softly, his voice hard to hear over the music. "Stop analyzing. Just feel the music. Feel me guiding you. Let everything else disappear." He began again, slower this time. Instead of trying to teach her steps, he simply moved with her, letting her mechanical legs follow his guidance through the contact of their joined hands and the subtle pressure of his direction. Gradually, something began to shift. The neural interfaces started responding not just to her conscious commands, but to the subtle cues from Vince's guidance, the pull of the music, the natural rhythm that seemed to flow between them. Her steps became smoother, less calculated. The mechanical legs began to feel less like foreign attachments and more like extensions of her will, responding to intention rather than instruction. "That's it," Vince murmured, his voice warm. "You're not thinking anymore. You're just moving. You're dancing." The realization hit her like a wave of warmth through her chest. She was dancing, actually dancing, for the first time in 10 years. The room spun around them in a blur of sunlight and shadow, her lavender hair floating like silk, as Vince spun her gently. "Thank you," she said, looking up into his brown eyes as they swayed together. "For everything, for the letters that kept me sane, for coming here when any rational person would have stayed safely away, for giving me this, for giving me back myself." His gaze intensified, and suddenly they weren't just dancing anymore. They were moving together in perfect synchronization, her mechanical legs responding to his guidance as if they'd been dancing together for years instead of days. The air between them seemed charged, something that had been building through 10 years of letters and 10 days of intimate collaboration on the most forbidden project imaginable. "Lialy," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "In all those letters, through all those years, I never told you everything I felt. I never said how I thought about you every day, how your words became the brightest part of my existence, how I—" His mechanical hand came up to cup her face, the synthetic skin warm against her cheek as his thumb traced the constellation of white dots along her cheekbone. She found herself leaning into the touch, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of dancing. The music continued around them, but it seemed distant now, secondary to the intensity of his gaze and the warmth spreading through her chest. If he asked her to leave with him right now, she realized with startling clarity, to abandon everything she'd ever known and travel the stars together, to become an exile from her own people, for the sake of whatever this was growing between them. She might actually say yes. I never said that I... Lialy, dear, we're here. Her mother's melodic voice echoed through the house with the clarity of a bell, followed immediately by the sudden opening of the front door. The AI let us in. We brought lunch and wanted to discuss the upcoming family gathering. They sprang apart as if electrified, the spell broken so abruptly that Lialy nearly stumbled. The music was still playing, mockingly cheerful in the sudden tension. "Hide!" Lialy said, panic flooding her system as she heard her parents' voices getting closer. "Where?" Vince looked around frantically, his eyes wide from the interrupted movement. "Anywhere! Behind the curtains!" She was already moving, her enhanced legs carrying her toward where she'd strategically positioned her wheelchair near the window. "My wheelchair! Oh, I need my wheelchair!" Vince dove behind the heavy window curtains just as Lialy reached her chair and practically threw herself into it, the transition from standing to sitting jarring enough to make her wince. She grabbed a thick blanket from the nearby sofa and yanked it over her legs, trying to hide both the mechanical frameworks and her scandalous clothing choices while simultaneously reaching for the audio projector to silence the damning music. "Lialy." Her mother's voice was getting closer, accompanied by the soft whisper of expensive fabric and the faint chiming of traditional Yazur jewelry. "Are you in the living room, dear? I thought I heard music." "Just a moment, Mother," Lialy called back, frantically arranging the blanket to look natural while her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough that she wondered if the sound was audible from across the room. Her parents entered the room together, her mother, Kelvira, moving with the grace of Yazur nobility, her lavender hair streaked with elegant silver and arranged in the complex braided style that indicated her high status in their community. Her silver eyes, so like Lialy's own, held the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most respected negotiators in the family business. Behind her came her father, Gentis, a quieter presence but no less imposing. His blue skin was darker than Lialy's, and despite his age, he was still strong and tall. "Darling, you look flushed," Kelvira observed immediately, her maternal instincts combined with her negotiator's eye for detail. "Are you feeling well? And what's this music system? I don't remember you having anything like that." Lialy's mind raced. I've been doing some light exercises. The AI suggested music might help with coordination." But Kelvira was already moving around the room, her keen eyes cataloguing every change. "Why's all the furniture moved around?" she asked, running her fingers along the back of a sofa that had clearly been repositioned. "This entire room has been rearranged. The coffee table is against the wall, the chairs are pushed into corners, and you've created what appears to be an open space in the center of the room. Who helped you do this? You couldn't have managed it alone. These pieces are far too heavy for someone in a wheelchair to move." I've been doing some redecorating," Lialy said weakly, acutely aware of how transparent her excuse sounded. "The AI is helper drones that can move furniture." Kelvira's silver eyes narrowed in the way that had struck fear into the hearts of business rivals. "Helper drones? Since when does our family's residential AI have physical manipulation capabilities? I don't remember paying for it." Her father remained characteristically silent, but Lialy could see him taking in every detail. The moved furniture, her flushed appearance, the unfamiliar music device, the way she was clutching the blanket around her legs with unusual protectiveness. "And why?" Kelvira continued, moving closer with the predatory grace of someone closing in on an inconsistency. "Are you dressed like that? Is that what you call appropriate day wear? That top barely covers anything." Lialy felt heat rising in her cheeks, her natural blue skin taking on a purple tinge that she knew her mother would recognize as embarrassment. "It's been warm lately. The climate control has been unreliable." Calvira's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing this time. Her mother's suspicion was clearly escalating to active investigation. She moved to the dining table, where the evidence of the previous night's dinner still sat in plain view. Two place settings with the remnants of a meal that had clearly been shared by two people. "How interesting," Calvira said. "Since when do you set the table for two when you're dining alone?" Lialy's mind raced desperately for an explanation that wouldn't immediately collapse under scrutiny. I've been practicing formal dining etiquette. You always complain about my table manners. I'm trying to fix it." "Practice dining etiquette?" Calvira's eyebrows rose. "By eating meals with imaginary companions, Lialy? Darling, I may have raised you to be creative, but I didn't raise you to be a liar." Before Lialy could attempt another explanation, her mother's sharp eyes caught something else that made her freeze. "What's that behind the curtains?" Calvira asked, her voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that preceded major family confrontations. "Mother, I can explain!" But it was too late. Calvira strode to the window and grabbed the heavy curtains, pulling them aside with a sharp gesture and revealing Vince pressed against the window like a guilty child caught in mischief. For a moment, nobody moved. Vince stood frozen with his hand slightly raised, his mechanical arm visible to all. His hair was disheveled from his hasty concealment, his clothes rumpled, and his expression suggested he was seriously considering whether the window behind him was high enough off the ground to make jumping worthwhile. "Hello?" he said with forced cheerfulness, stepping forward with his most diplomatic smile and extending his human hand in what he clearly hoped was a gesture of friendly introduction. You must be Lialy's parents. I'm Vince Riviera, her friend. It's a pleasure to finally meet you both." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Calvira looked between Vince and her daughter with growing understanding and horror, her silver eyes widening as she took in his obviously human features, his mechanical arm, and the implications of his presence in her daughter's home while said daughter was dressed like a courtesan. Gentis remained silent for a long moment, his gaze methodically cataloguing Vince's appearance, the mechanical limb, the human facial structure, the awkward smile. "A human," he said with perfect deadpan delivery, his silver eyes fixed on Vince. "What exactly are your intentions with our daughter? And before you answer, I should mention that I have extensive experience in corporate security, which means I'm very good at detecting lies, very good at conducting investigations, and very good at making problems disappear when they threaten my family's well-being." Several minutes had passed since her father's pointed question, and now they all sat in tense silence around the dining table, the same table that had held the evidence of their shared meals and growing intimacy. Lialy had wrapped herself in a large towel, the terry cloth covering her from shoulders to knees, though she couldn't decide whether it was a blessing or a curse that her parents were no longer looking at her. Their averted gazes meant no risk of them discovering the mechanical legs hidden beneath the table, but it also meant they were directing their full attention and suspicion toward Vince. He cleared his throat tentatively, his hands folded carefully in front of him on the table. "I should explain who I am, exactly. I'm the human who lost his arm in the attack on your daughter 10 years ago. The one who never pursued legal action against your family through the Galactic Council." The words had barely left his mouth when Gentis's fist crashed down on the table with enough force to make the dishes jump and ring like discordant bells. The sound cut through Vince's explanation like a blade. "Obviously you didn't sue us," Gentis said, his eyes sharp. because you chose to take advantage of our daughter for much more profit than any lawsuit could provide. An interspecies love scam targeting an emotionally vulnerable young woman. It's not unheard of when it comes to humans. Prey on the lonely, the isolated, the desperate. Build a relationship over years, gain their trust, then extract whatever wealth you can before disappearing. Vince's face went pale, the color draining from his features as if he'd been physically struck, his mechanical arm shaking, the only outward sign of his inner turmoil, while his human hand remained perfectly still on the table. "I never liked those letters," Calvira added, her voice cold. 10 years of correspondence with a stranger, filling our daughter's head with romantic notions and keeping her isolated from suitable partners of her own species. I should have put a stop to it years ago. But their continued insults began to fade from Lialy's ears as something shifted inside her mind. She felt herself detaching from the present moment, withdrawing into the quiet space of her own thoughts while her parents' voices became distant background noise. In that internal silence, she began to catalogue everything Vince had done, not just in the past 10 days, but across the entire span of their relationship. He had written to her faithfully for 10 years, never missing a month, never letting their correspondence lapse even when she had sometimes been too depressed to respond for weeks at a time. He had shared his own struggles, his own journey, without ever making it a competition or minimizing her experiences. He had traveled across star systems with a ridiculous backpack full of equipment he'd spent years developing, equipment that didn't exist anywhere in Yazur space, technology he'd created specifically for her. He had studied her species' biology, her culture, their history and fears and prejudices. He had taken the loss of his own limb and turned it into expertise that could help her, had used his own body as a testing ground for technologies that might restore what she had lost. The realization hit her in the heart, emotions escalating with sudden, overwhelming intensity. What she felt for him, what had been building slowly through years of letters and days of intimate collaboration, crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. Love. The word that probably would have taken weeks or months to emerge naturally, forced into sharp focus by the crisis her parents had created. She loved him, loved his gentle humor, his intelligence, his stubborn refusal to accept that some things couldn't be fixed, loved his patient hands teaching her to dance again. The explosion of emotion built inside her chest until she couldn't contain it any longer. She threw the towel aside with violent motion, letting it fall to the floor, then kicked away the blanket that had been hiding both her mechanical legs and her scandalous attire. Her parents didn't even notice, too focused on their verbal assault against Vince, who was taking their accusations in complete silence, his face a mask of controlled pain. Lialy rose on her mechanical legs, the limbs quickly adjusting to support her weight. The mechanical sound was enough to cut through her parents' tirade, creating a profound silence that seemed to fill the entire house. She walked toward Vince with slow steps, her new legs carrying her to him. "Look at yourselves," she said when she reached him. "Look at what you're doing. This human spent 10 years writing to your daughter when she had no other friends. He lost his arm because of me, because of our family's visibility, our wealth, our position, and instead of blaming us, he chose to help me. He spent years of his life creating technology that could give me back what I lost, traveled across the galaxy to offer it freely, and you accuse him of running some elaborate financial scam?" She turned to face Vince, her silver eyes blazing with emotion. "I love you," she said simply, the words sharp, carrying the feelings of 10 years of distant friendship and 10 days of growing intimacy. "You haven't asked, and maybe this is selfish of me, but I'm asking you. Take me with you. To Earth, to space, to whatever corner of the galaxy you call home. I don't care about the consequences anymore." The silence that followed was absolute. broken perhaps by her own heartbeat. It took a few moments, but Vince suddenly rose from his seat, and for a moment Lialy thought he might sweep her toward the door, might take her hand and lead her away from this confrontation toward whatever new life awaited them among the stars. Instead, he removed his jacket and draped it gently around her shoulders, covering her exposed skin with the same careful attention he'd shown when calibrating her mechanical interfaces. He turned to face her shocked parents, his voice calm now. "Taking your daughter away or extracting money from your family was never my intention. Losing a limb to a human is a mild inconvenience these days. Our medical technology makes it barely more than a temporary setback. All I wanted was for Lialy to live a normal life again, without cultural constraints that don't make sense in an age when technology can solve problems that biology cannot." He moved behind her, his arms encircling her in an embrace that felt like coming home. "Yes," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. "I love you too. I wasn't planning to say it anytime soon. I thought we had time to let it develop naturally, but it seems like circumstances have forced it out of both of us." The awkward silence stretched between them like a chasm, heavy. Finally, it was Gentis who broke it, his voice rough. "I've considered taking her off-world to get her legs many times over the years," he admitted, his silver eyes bright with unshed tears. "The technology exists, I know it does, but the religious factions, the traditional families, they would have destroyed our business, ruined everything we've built. I told myself I was protecting our family's legacy, but the truth is I was just weak. I chose profit over my daughter's happiness, and I'm sorry." Tears began to flow down his dark blue cheeks, tracing silver paths through the white dots that marked his heritage. "I'm so sorry, Lialy. You deserved better from me." Calvira remained silent for a long moment, her sharp eyes studying the displays of emotion before her. Her daughter standing on mechanical legs in an embrace of an alien, both of them radiating a happiness and completeness she hadn't seen in years. When she finally spoke, her voice hadn't changed much. It was cold as always. "If we gave you enough money to ensure Lialy's comfort and arranged for a safe home on another planet," she said, addressing Vince directly, "would you take her with you and keep your relationship discreet? No public appearances, no declarations that might embarrass our family's position in Yazua society." Vince sighed, and for the first time since the confrontation began, there was a note of genuine annoyance in his voice. "I'm not poor," he said flatly. "I don't need your money to give Lialy an amazing life. I have my own resources, and they are not insignificant, and I have no interest in ruining anyone's business or spending my life as an activist trying to change your culture. That's not why I'm here." He turned slightly, his brown eyes meeting Lialy's silver ones, his voice addressing her, not her mother. "But I do have a question for you. Would you like to spend a few months on Earth with me? See where I come from, meet my colleagues, experience a world where your mechanical legs would be admired rather than hidden?" Lialy smiled, the expression transforming her entire face with radiant joy. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I would love that." And just like that, the most tense moment of Lialy's life was over. Years later, she would look back at this afternoon and laugh, realizing that even among humans, who were notorious for their dramatic romantic gestures, it was quite a story of how she'd introduced her future husband to her parents.